Thomas's voice rises to urgency in responding to, where are we? We hear his call towards understanding the deeper, integral functioning of planet Earth, even as he laments soil loss, water imperiled, human arrogance called wisdom. Yes, a prophetic voice of anger, yet tempered with an ever-loving commitment. Barry's sense of history is fundamental to his vision, a vision of universe unfolding over 14 billion years, now imperiled by the terrible mystery of human presence, which, in all of our Western establishments, places human consciousness as primary over the more than human world, in which we have been integrated as one of a divine creation, but of which we have lost our indigenous original teachings for visions of bettering, developing, managing, manipulating. Fascinated by our abilities to control microphases, losing the capacity to contemplate the macro phases, the integral functioning of the universe giving rise to Earth, yet still inherent in our deepest self. We see it rising now, even as we face denial and determination, gasping for authority. How shall we go forward as we see where we are?
Thomas, one of the main questions we want to explore would be the question of where are we, in the sense of a person comes along and is wondering about really where they are in terms of the universe, in terms of history. Where are we? How would you answer that question?
Well, there's so many ways of saying where are we. It's a question of the economics of where are we. That's what the newspapers are constantly dealing with. And in their front page particularly, and also in editorials, trying to identify where we are economically and politically for the most part. The difficulty is that we are unable to locate ourselves properly as regards the larger dimensions of what's happening, for instance, in economics. The very basis of our economy is being disrupted by our disruption of the natural world. Our resources are being depleted, the soil's being exhausted, and in ordinary media, these things are not dealt with. It's mainly the question of the stock market or what corporations are taking over other corporations, the new inventions that are taking place, the new controls that humans are exercising over the natural world. So what's needed is to get a larger perspective on where we are. For instance, we're losing 25 billion tons of topsoil every year. That doesn't appear in the media. It doesn't appear in the general teaching of history or even in our sociology programs. But it's a primary fact of what's happening. Where are we? Where are we in relationship to the water we drink? The water we drink is being polluted. We are exhausting the aquifer under the Great Plains. Our food supply is being altered in its basic sources. So where are we in what might be called the macrophase dimensions of the human venture? So what I have in mind is that what's happening now is something beyond ordinary events in human history. We think of history, we think of the movement from the classical world to the medieval world, or from the medieval world to the industrial world. Or we can think of the transition from the Neolithic world to the Neolithic world when humans settled into villages and settled into agricultural mode of living. These are modes of thinking about where we are. My own thinking is that we are at a moment of change that goes far beyond the human endeavor, certainly far beyond such a change as took place from, say, the medieval world to the industrial world. We are now changing the planet Earth. We're changing the chemistry of the planet. It took billions of years to bring into existence. For the first time, humans are changing the very chemistry of the planet, and in an irreversible way. We are changing the oceans. The oceans will never again be the same. The pollution that we've introduced to them is a definitive status. We are changing the soil. It took so long to structure the soil of the planet. But now, through human influence and through human alteration of things, the soil is being depleted at a terrible rate. We've introduced the chemical age, particularly since the Second World War. In the late 1930s, we were manufacturing 500,000 tons of industrial chemicals every year. That's 500,000 tons. So we are now making 200 million tons, from 500,000 to 200 million tons of industrial chemicals that the nature cannot deal with. So the consequences of this are awesome. We're cutting the forests at a rate where we're losing each year a vast amount of the rainforest that took 65 million years to bring into existence. So what's happening now is something that hasn't happened for 65 million years of the Cenozoic. The Cenozoic period is the period that began at the termination of the dinosaur period, 65 million years ago. It began 220 million years ago, the Mesozoic or the dinosaur period, when so many wonderful things happened. The trees developed in this time, the flowers came into being, the mammals began to develop, the birds, and there was a change 65 million years ago when there was an extensive loss of species, but these four came through to constitute a basic structure of what might be called the Cenozoic period in the life history of the planet Earth. And this has developed into what I call the lyric period in the biological history of the planet, because so many beautiful things came into existence. The wonderful species of flowers came into existence. The birds developed in all their beauty of song and their beautiful colors. The trees flourished, and particularly the mammals of the animals. The mammals flourished so wonderfully well, and the humans probably could not have come into existence until we had such a beautiful, wondrous planet. And this was needed for humans because to bear the burden of human intelligence and consciousness at the human level required a healing environment, because humans make mistakes, they feel bad about it. They have to have the encouragement and the wonder and the beauty and the ecstasy that we get from the beauty of the world about us. Well, all of this is to some extent imperiled at the present time. And we're losing species. Species are going extinct at a very high rate, 100 times at least more than in previous times. So what I have in mind as regards the present is the dimensions of what's happening, because if you teach history now, in terms of classical history, of Western history, in terms of the classical age, the medieval age, the 16th century Reformation period, the Enlightenment period, the industrial period, as though we are now simply at a transition at that order of magnitude, it's totally inadequate. We are into macro phase historical changes that are definitive as regards the total future, because the species that go extinct will never again exist. Neither heaven nor earth can restore extinct species. We're changing the chemistry of the planet in a definitive way. And we are extinguishing species. We are changing the chemistry of the planet. And we are altering the way in which humans are going to survive. Now, take the petroleum. At the present time, the petroleum is the source of our food because of the fertilizer that it supplies. It's almost impossible to think of our present volume of food production without petroleum, because we're using a vast amount of fertilizer. So our food is transformed petroleum to a large extent. Our clothing, our fabrics are made ultimately from artificial fibers. At least a good amount of our clothes are made from artificial fibers that are derived from petroleum. They're chemically made. We have our transportation. Our automobiles run on gas. Our airplanes run on gas. They depend on petroleum. We have our energy systems. Our electrical supply is to a large extent petroleum-based. And also the plastics. We have just an immense volume of plastics that are being developed. Our children's toys, almost everything. We have furniture, just all the things that we make, the bags that we carry our purchases in, petroleum-based. So that the petroleum is going to be gone within 40, 50 years. 80% at least will be gone. Even though we discover a great deal more, it's not going to last. So this is an enormous change. That's where we are in terms of the difficulty that we're going to face in a relatively short future. So when I talk about where we are, that's the way I think about it. And this has to do with our food, our clothing, our energy, and the total structure of life. And at the present time, in this generation, we are indulging ourselves at an awesome rate. We're making an awful lot of money. Their companies are expanding production in 1,000 different ways, as though this petroleum supply were going to go on forever. But it has a very limited future. And our children are going to have to deal with it. The other thing is population. When I was born in 1914, there were fewer than 2 billion people on the planet. And that's after all the years, the centuries, the millennia of existence of humans, we still had less than 2 billion people on the planet. And it took how many hundreds of thousands of years for that many people to develop. Now, simply within my lifetime, It's gone from less than 2 billion to 6 billion, and young people today will see 8 to 10 billion. So in 2 lifetimes, the population of the Earth has vastly increased. So we have a vast increase in population. We have a reduction of resources, and this sets the stage for the future. That all sounds rather grim, I'm sure.
Thomas, when you describe where we are and we really hear the levels of destruction, it's not really, as you say, the end of a historical era, but it's the destruction of a biological era, and we're destroying even the very fabric of our civilization, our economics, and our very existence. It just seems to be really important to understand in a deep way how it is that we arrived at this situation of just so much destruction. Because unless we understand something about how we got here, really in careful detail, we're not going to be able to move ahead.
Well, quite definitely. And it's most important, too, to understand that this happened out of Western civilization, out of the civilization that considered it had the very highest spiritual insight, the highest revelation of the divine, a civilization that had a great humanist tradition. We considered ourselves in many ways the most human of peoples. We had a great political tradition. We had the great wisdom as regards how to use the resources of the earth. We considered ourselves the pinnacle of human achievement. And right at the high point of this, after we develop all our technologies, after we have such a deep religious tradition developed, we find that we are the people that are terminating the beauties of the planet Earth. We are disturbing the very structure of life and have become a kind of almost demonic presence on the planet. It's a heavy word to use, but we have the problem of why the wisest people in the world, as we thought ourselves, why we end up causing such a devastation. Well, to my mind, there is a very simple reason that flows through the whole structure of Western life. It's in our legal, political system. It's in our religious system. It's in our economics. And it's in our education. These are the 4 establishments that govern Western life. The government, the political, the corporation, the economic control, the university, the intellectual development, and the religious structure of the church. All 4 of these are failing at the present time because they are not guiding us. They have not shown how we should deal with our presence on the planet. This is all a question of how humans relate to the more than human world, or the non-human world, it might be called, or the other than human world, or perhaps best of all, the more than human. To say non-human is kind of negative. But the question of the human relating to the context in which the human lives, because the human doesn't live simply in itself. So the biggest problem that humans confront is how we relate to the air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil that grows our food, how we relate to the sunlight that we get our energy. So if that relationship is not preserved in an integral way, then everything goes to pieces. So what I would say as regards how we got here is that in Western civilization, we have established a discontinuity between the non-human and the human, and have given all the inherent values and rights to the human, no inherent values or rights to the non-human except to be used by the human. Now, in this manner, we have set up a situation where humans think that in the Western civilization, particularly, that we have a right to plunder or exploit the non-human for the benefit of the human in a limitless way. We seem to have no recognition that there are not two societies on the planet Earth. The planet Earth is a single, integral, functional, social structure. It's put together in such a way that all the components need each other, and all the components constitute a single, wonderful entity. So, and everything has rights. Everything has its inherent value. The rivers have a right to flow. Animals have the right to habitat. And they have their dignity. They have their wonder. And the human is one of a great variety of modes of being, and all are needed. We need the animals, we need the plants, we need the soil, we need the water, we need the sunlight, and it's not simply that we need them in this kind of economic or mechanical way, but we all constitute an integral life entity composed of qualitatively different modes of life. The human has its own distinctive mode. The trees have theirs, the flowers have theirs, the birds have theirs, but it's put together in a system of interdependencies that make everything necessary for everything else. And so the human has to realize that the primary value is not the human specifically. The human has its value. The flowers have their value. But what's the real value? The real value is the total community. The created order of things is for the totality of the creation. It's why in our traditional, cultural sense, in the Bible, it said each thing is, in the day of creation, was said it's good. This is good, the creation of the animals, creation of the plants and the seas and so forth. Each day, what's done is called good. The last day, so it's very good. And that is in the tradition. We do have a tradition that says that the order of the universe is the ultimate value. And humans have their value in this, but we also have to value the non-human not simply as available to be used by the human, but as intrinsic value and a part of the very purpose of existence, because the purpose of the existence of things is in the total community. Now, what has happened, though, is that Western development, the way Western development has taken place religiously, we have the sense of transcendent personal deity creating a world that has its good aspect. But there's also something that is lost in the sense of a desacralization of the natural world. And the natural world is the primary revelatory expression of the divine. The primary manifestation of the divine is in the universe, in the natural world. Now, when we take the divine and constellate it in a transcendent status, in some manner, certainly distinct from, in some manner, we think of it as separate from the natural world. It's not separate from the natural world. It's inner dynamism, but our religious teaching doesn't present that in any adequate way. So otherwise, there would be a terrible protest on the part of religion to the destruction of the natural world, because the devastation of the natural world is a devastation of the very source of religion, because religion comes from our sense of wonder and the beauty and majesty and awesomeness of the natural world. It's the source of religious development in the human. But we drop that. We don't do that. And that's why we can see all the devastation in the religions. The Western religious traditions are not protesting significantly. So that's one of the difficulties that we face. And there's another difficulty in the humanist tradition. In other words, this is a flaw in the deepest sources of Western cultural tradition. And there's a source in the religious emphasis on the human, the detriment of the non-human. In the Greek world and our humanist traditions, we teach that the human is the measure of things. The human's not the measure of things. The measure of things is in the totality of the universe, because every part exists in relationship to the other parts. In any organized structure or any organic being, the parts are for the integration of the whole. And the human is there for the benefit of the whole of the universe. So when the human is emphasized in our humanist tradition so exclusively, then we begin to not to value the non-human. So we can devastate the forest and think nothing of it. We can ruin the rivers, think nothing of it. Well, that's a terrible thing. Then another source is and I call these transcendences, making the human transcendent to the natural world. In Descartes comes along, and our whole modern thought about the globe or the natural world is based on Descartes, who said that there's two aspects of the universe. There's mind and extension. The human has mind. Everything else is mechanistic. Birds have no intrinsic principle. There's no intrinsic principle in plants or trees. There's only the mechanism. And the mechanism is attuned by its creator to everything else so that the whole mechanism functions, but there's no intrinsic principle. So we get this, what I call the transcendent mind. And then we get what I call transcendent technology, which violates the basic biological law. The basic biological law is that every species should have opposed species or conditions that limit each species so that no one species would overwhelm the other species. That's the limit of population. Well, humans, by our technologies, by our skills, by our cunning, can subvert that basic biological law. That's why we're overpopulating the planet. And we take over the habitat of the animals. We take over all the various sources of nourishment of the planet. We abuse the planet in order to support an extravagant human population. But obviously this can continue. So I put the source of it in the discontinuity, as I express it, between the non-human and the human, and the human unwillingness to accept its position as an integral component of a larger social mode of being.
And so we see that as you describe it so powerfully, that you have a transcendent deity and you have a transcendent human psyche with the Greeks and with Descartes, and then this notion of a technology that transcends any sort of natural control. What about the whole drive towards remaking the Earth and sort of a consumer artifact?
Yeah, we're trying to turn the planet into a mechanistic functioning thing controlled by humans. We might say this, I'd say it this way. The only self-referent mode of being in the universe is the universe. Now, in other words, we have to think, when we think of values, when we think of the reality of things, we have to think, what is the primary reality? What is the primary value? Now, I would say that the universe has no further context of understanding. Everything in the universe has to be explained in terms of the universe, just like everything on Earth has to be explained as a component of the Earth. And the Earth is the integral value, or the basic referent. Everything on Earth has to be referred to the Earth in its reality and its value. The universe, however, is the ultimate reality of things in the phenomenal order, because everything comes into being, is brought into being by the universe. And within the universe, we have the planet Earth, which is the primary referent as regards everything on the Earth, because everything on the Earth is brought into being by the Earth and has to be referred back to the Earth as its primary referent as regards reality and value and how it functions. The difficulty is that rather than making the universe or the planet Earth the basic referent, humans are making themselves self-referent and everything else human-referent. That's what I was explaining about in terms of those four areas: our religion, our humanist tradition, our philosophical tradition, and our technological tradition. These four things. They all are tending to make the human the primary referent, and everything else has its value in relationship to the human. And in that sense, we assume control over it. So the basic direction in which things are moving is toward a technological society where we would turn everything into instrumentalities, mechanistic instrumentalities that are run by the human. We're trying to make a self-sustaining technological universe.
So we have a tradition, a cultural tradition, a scientific tradition that really begins with a discontinuity between the human and the rest of the universe. And so we place all value in the human, and our focus is on the human agenda and so forth. But what is it that dynamizes this whole sweep of activity?
The self-fascination of the human by the human. In other words, It's the self-glorification of the human and the self-aggrandizement of the human that has become, it's a self-fascination or entrancement of the human with itself.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being entranced with the universe, normally in indigenous peoples, entranced by the universe, entranced by the flowers, the trees, the stars, and the heavens. The whole business is an entrancement. People live in an entrancing world. Now, and a recognition that constitutes the world of meaning, the comprehensive world of meaning, and human has its meaning within that context. And human have no meaning outside of that context. But as humans have developed a capacity not simply to interact with the variety of things in the universe, we have gradually assumed control over the planet Earth and the functioning of the planet Earth, and have become manipulative and progressively have assumed a controlling position.
And so now we have this control, and we're destroying so much of it out of our own fascination with just the human enterprise.
And we have the strange thing that we can run the system. It took the universe billions of years, a universe perhaps 10 to 12 billion years, to work this system out. This system was worked out so magnificently. And now, in a very short time, of course, humans have been around in our civilized, what we call the urban literate civilizations, only 5,000 years. It's 5,000 years over against 15 billion years. A billion is 1,000 million years. And so, in a very fragment of time, and that's the mystery of the thing, in a very fragment of time, the most beautiful planet that we know of in the universe, and the Earth, is by all odds the most splendid production of these billions of years. Humans have taken over, have assumed, with their very limited intelligence and their capacity to interact with the mechanics of the planet Earth to a certain degree, and we get a little knowledge, but we find that knowledge is fragmentary, and particularly our actions. For instance, we think of the microphase consequences of our action. We have no idea of the macrophase consequences of what we do. And that is the fatal error. For instance, we develop fertilizer, chemicals, and we can put chemicals in the soil and force the growth of things far beyond what the rhythms of nature, the ever-renewing processes of nature would do. But we think, well, we can get more food. Meanwhile, we just destroy the capacity of the soil to produce food. We have to pour more water. We have to irrigate more. But we assume that we can do this and get away with it. But then gradually need more and more fertilizer. And then we find out that salinization takes place. As the water dries up, it leaves salt solutions. And gradually, the earth becomes sterile. But we're so wise. We thought we could run the show. We thought we could do better than the planet, than the soil can do it, than these fertile plains can do it. We can do better. So now we've lost 40 to 50% of the fertility of the soil. We've lost, by erosion, in some cases, I think we've lost 50% of the soil. In fact, in this country, we are losing 4 to 6 billion tons of topsoil every single year. Corn, for instance, that we use for our cattle feed. We think we're wise in growing corn. And look what's happening. We're exhausting the aquifers that are a one-time deal because they don't refill themselves, particularly the Oglala aquifer under the plains that is used to make such a great volume of grain, and particularly corn, that is being depleted again at a terrible rate. And corn can use 20 tons of topsoil an acre in a year, and then we feed it to 90% of it goes for animal feed, and we developed our meat diet, and we find that that's questionable in itself, but the whole thing is a kind of draws us into a pathology. Our whole economy begins to depend on these things that we're doing, that we think we're so wise with. We're so knowledgeable. And then we get the petroleum, again, an example of what we do. Take the petroleum. We find the petroleum in the earth. We figure we can use it for energy. We can use it for a lot of different things. So let's take it out of the ground. Let's use it and get all these benefits from it. And we don't ask the simple question, why is the petroleum there in the first place? And just a little bit of knowledge would tell us that there's a purpose of nature putting the petroleum there. It's a way of balancing out the chemistry of the planet and of storing the carbon. Now, if you take that out and burn it and put the residue into the chemical mixture of the planet, you're going to ruin the whole chemical balance of the planet. And together with the other consequences of using the petroleum to disturb the way in which the planet functions, because you put it into plastics, say. We can make plastics. And we think it's good because plastic lasts and we don't have to reproduce paper bags. We can make plastic. But then the plastics last such a long time. Our oceans are full of plastic. Our woodlands, our recreation areas are filled up with plastic this and plastic that. And it just, again, disturbs at least the beauty, if not the very functioning of the earth. Our wisdom has led us to devastation consequences, but we're continuing to press this more and more with more and more devastation. So, in other words, when we make the human the measure of things, we inevitably bring about consequences that we seem to be unaware of.